She traded a scalpel for a mop. Her hands, once trusted to suture a beating heart, now scrubbed graffiti from school lockers. Dr. Alina Vance was a ghost in the hallways, until the day she was cornered by three little girls who saw not a janitor, but the woman who had saved their father's life. Her fall from grace was not a failure. It was a burial, and they were about to dig up the truth. This is the story of Dr. Alina Vance. A decade ago, she was a rising star in pediatric cardiothoracic surgery, featured in medical journals for her innovative techniques. Today, her world is bleach and floor wax. But in America, she is not alone. Over 250,000 immigrant health professionals are trapped in the same purgatory, their credentials worthless, their skills collecting dust. So what force could shatter a surgeon's hands and lock away her genius? The truth is more dangerous than any medical error. In London, Alina Vance wasn't just a doctor, she was a prodigy. By 32, she was the youngest person ever to lead the pediatric cardiothoracic unit at Great Ormond Street Hospital, a fortress of medicine where she pioneered a valve repair technique that saved infants deemed inoperable. Her hands moved with a confidence that was less like surgery and more like artistry. Journals called her the Mozart of the mitral valve. Then, in 2012, her world fractured. Her sister and brother-in-law were killed in a car accident outside Boston. Their three infant daughters, the triplets, survived. Alina arrived in Massachusetts for the funeral and looked into the eyes of the only family she had left. The estate was a mess. Legal guardianship was a labyrinth. A return ticket to London felt like a betrayal written in blood. She made a choice no textbook could guide. She stayed. She arrived in America with her nieces, three Bobbies, a trunk full of medical accolades, and a catastrophic misunderstanding. She believed her credentials, her degrees from Cambridge, her fellowship at Johns Hopkins, a decade of peer-reviewed breakthroughs, were a universal language. They were not. They were a locked door. The United States medical system is not a monolith. It is 50 separate fiefdoms, each with its own licensing board, its own rules, its own fortress walls. To practice in Massachusetts, Alina would need to jump through a series of flaming hoops designed for a new graduate, not a department head. She needed to pass the United States medical licensing examination steps 1, 2, and 3, exams focused on basic science and clinical knowledge she had mastered 15 years prior. The cost? Over $5,000 just to sit for them. The time to study, while caring for three newborns. She hired a nanny with the last of her British savings and buried herself in textbooks, relearning biochemistry at 3 a.m. between feedings. She passed all of them on the first try, but passing the exams was merely buying a ticket to the starting line. Next came the true gauntlet, the re-entry or relicensing pathway. Because she had been out of a U.S. residency program for over a decade, state boards viewed her as a high-risk applicant. She was required to complete a supervised practice, essentially a mini-residency, under the watch of an already licensed surgeon. She had to find a hospital willing to sponsor her, a surgeon willing to mentor a former peer and secure malpractice insurance at astronomical rates. She called every major hospital in Boston. The answer was a polite, systemic no. Your experience is impressive, Dr. Vance, but our program is for current residents. The liability is too great. We don't have a mechanism for this. The door wasn't just locked. The wall around it had been painted over. Her savings evaporated. The nanny was let go. The choice became binary. Pursue a phantom license that might take 3 more years and tens of thousands of dollars she didn't have, or ensure her girls had food and a home. She took a job as a medical scribe in an emergency room, documenting the work of other doctors for $18 an hour. The humiliation was a cold, daily bath. She watched residents make decisions she would have questioned, biting her tongue until it bled. One night, a child came in with a heart murmur the attending dismissed. Alina saw the signs of a deteriorating valve from across the room. She wrote a subtle note in the chart, phrasing it as a question. The attending read it, re-examined the child, and ordered the correct tests. He was praised. Alina filed the paperwork. That was the moment she understood her new place in the hierarchy. She was a ghost in the machine, whispering diagnostics that others claimed. But the financial math still didn't work. Rent, formula, childcare for three. It was a tsunami against a scribe's wage. She picked up weekend shifts as a home health aide, bathing elderly patients, changing bedpans. The hands that had once restructured a newborn's heart now wiped adult skin raw to prevent bed sores. The fall was accelerating. Then, in 2016, a final blow. Her husband, Mark, a historian she had married in a rushed courthouse ceremony for stability, was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. The medical bills, even with insurance, were a bottomless pit. The choice was now a triage: save his life or save her career. She chose him. She took a second mortgage. She sold everything from her old life. She spent 18 months in hospice care at home, the girls playing in the next room as their uncle by marriage faded. When he passed, she was not just a widow. She was bankrupt, drowning in six-figure debt. It was then, in the sterile office of a financial advisor, that the word janitor was first offered as a solution. The local school district paid $22 an hour with full family health benefits. The shift started at 5 a.m., meaning she could be home when the girls got off the bus at 3. It was stable, unionized, and utterly devoid of the emotional carnage of healthcare. She applied, listing none of her medical history. They saw a woman with a clean record, strong shoulders, and a desperate need for the insurance. She was hired on the spot. The first day she put on the gray uniform, she stood in front of the mirror and practiced removing her wedding ring and the simple band she wore from her internship. The symbols of her two loves, her partner and her profession, went into a small jewelry box. She closed the lid. Dr. Eleanor Vance reported for duty at Lincoln Elementary. For 4 years, she perfected the art of invisibility. She knew the squeak of every floorboard, the stain in every sink. The children saw her as part of the building's furniture, a friendly woman who fixed stuck lockers and had a seemingly endless supply of Band-Aids. Her own girls, Sophie, Chloe, and Grace, now bright first graders, attended the school. They had a strict rule. At school, she was Miss Ellie from custodial. No hugs, no special treatment. They played their part perfectly, a secret family hidden in plain sight. Eleanor found a grim peace in the physical labor. Her mind, which once held the intricate maps of coronary arteries, now focused on stripping wax, calculating chemical dilution ratios, and the zen of a perfectly stacked chair. The grief and the debt were a constant hum, but the machine was quiet. Then, in the fall of 2023, a new family enrolled at Lincoln. A single father, Michael Thorne, and his 3 daughters. The triplets. Michael Thorne had his own history with hospitals. A former construction foreman, he had survived a catastrophic worksite collapse 5 years prior. A steel beam had sheared through his crane cab, crushing his chest. He was medevaced to Massachusetts General, where a surgical team, working against time, repaired a ruptured aorta and a shattered valve. He was told the surgeon who led that marathon procedure was a brilliant, young female doctor from out of town, a specialist who had consulted on his case. He never knew her name. He only knew the result: a brutal recovery, a medical retirement, and the daunting task of raising his girls alone. He moved to a quieter town for a fresh start, choosing Lincoln Elementary for its reputation. On his first day, walking his daughters to their classroom, he passed a janitor mopping the hallway. He offered a kind smile. The woman nodded back, her eyes lingering for a half-second on the scar that peeked above his collar, a scar she recognized because she had made it. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She knew the precise architecture of the trauma beneath his skin. She turned back to her mop bucket, her heart hammering against her ribs. The past she had buried was now walking the halls, holding the hands of 3 little girls who looked just like her own. The walls of her carefully constructed invisibility were already cracking. For weeks, Eleanor performed a delicate ballet of avoidance. She scheduled her hallway cleaning when she knew Michael Thorne would be at drop-off or pickup. She kept her head down, her hat low. But in a school, children are the ultimate chaos agents. Her own triplets, Sophie, Chloe, and Grace, were in the same first-grade class as Michael's girls, Ava, Emma, and Isabella. A friendship was inevitable. The 6 girls became a unit, a whirlwind of matching backpacks and shared snacks. They called themselves the Six-Pack. This friendship became the thin wedge that began to splinter Alina's secret world. One afternoon, during indoor recess due to rain, a ball bounced into the janitor's closet Alina had just left open. Ava Thorne ran to retrieve it. Inside, on a small shelf next to spare light bulbs, she saw a book. Not a cleaning manual, but a thick, dense textbook, Atlas of Pediatric Cardiovascular Surgery. It was Alina's personal copy, a relic she couldn't bring herself to throw away. Ava, curious, pulled it down. The cover fell open to the front page where an elegant script was written. Dr. Alina Vance, FRCS, Great Ormond Street Hospital. Ava brought the book to her father that evening, a prize from her adventure. "Look, Daddy, Miss Ellie has a doctor book with her name in it." Michael Thorne, exhausted from a day of physical therapy, took the heavy tome. He read the inscription. A cold, electric confusion shot through him. Vance. The name meant nothing, but Great Ormond Street rang a distant, hazy bell from his own long hospital stay. He remembered a British surgeon being mentioned in one of his many second opinion consultations, a name on a report he was too sedated to fully comprehend. He pushed the thought aside. A janitor with an old medical book. Maybe she was married to a doctor. Maybe it was a souvenir. He told Ava to return it quietly the next day. But the seed was planted. The catalyst came 2 weeks later. During a school-wide fire drill, chaos ensued on the playground. Children ran, teachers blew whistles. In the commotion, Grace, one of Alina's daughters, tripped and fell hard on the asphalt, splitting her chin open on the edge of a bench. Blood poured down her neck. A teacher screamed for the nurse, but the nurse was on the other side of the field. From across the blacktop, Alina saw the fall. Her maternal and medical instincts fused into a single, unstoppable command. She dropped her broom and ran. She did not amble. She sprinted with a focused, athletic grace that made teachers stop and stare. She reached Grace, kneeling in the blood. "Look at me, sweetheart. Look at Mummy's eyes." Her voice was calm, but it carried a tone of absolute authority that silenced the panic around her. She pulled a clean rag from her pocket, applying direct, precise pressure to the wound with one hand while tilting Grace's head up with the other. She assessed the bleed, the depth of the laceration, the child's pallor, all in under 3 seconds. "This needs sutures. Someone call 911. Tell them a 6-year-old female with a 2-inch deep laceration to the submental region, bleeding controlled but will need transport." The clinical terminology rolled off her tongue as naturally as breathing. She didn't look up until she heard a gasp beside her. Michael Thorne was there, holding Ava's hand, his face a mask of stunned recognition. He wasn't looking at the wound. He was looking at her hands. At the way her fingers held pressure, the specific angle, the professional certainty. He was looking into her eyes, and for the first time he truly saw her. The ambulance came. Grace was taken to the local hospital, with Alina riding alongside, still in her gray janitor's uniform, now stained with her daughter's blood. The emergency room doctor, a young resident, began to clean the wound. "We'll get this numbed and stitched right up," he said breezily. Alina, hovering, finally spoke. "You'll need to irrigate more deeply. There's asphalt particulate driven into the dermal layer. If you don't debride it thoroughly, it will tattoo the skin and risk infection." The resident blinked. "I'm aware of standard wound care, ma'am." "Then you'll also note the proximity to the mental nerve," Alina continued, her voice low but sharp. "A deep suture there with that gauge of needle could cause temporary paresthesia. I'd recommend a finer gauge and a subcutaneous closure first." The resident stared at her. "Are you a doctor?" The question hung in the curtain bay. Alina's guard, shattered by fear for her child, was down. She met his gaze. "I was." At that moment, Michael Thorne, who had followed in his car, pushed the curtain aside. He had heard everything. The puzzle pieces, the book, the scar on his own chest, the memory of a brilliant, nameless surgeon, the sheer force of her presence over a simple cut, clicked into a terrifying, glorious whole. He didn't confront her then. He waited. The next morning, he arrived at the school not for drop-off, but for a meeting he had demanded with the principal, Dr. Alicia Jenkins. In her office with the door closed, he laid it out. I believe your janitor, Alina Vance, is the surgeon who saved my life. I want to know why she's here." Dr. Jenkins, a pragmatic administrator, was skeptical. "Mr. Thorne, Miss Ellie is a valued employee. She's had a background check." "Run another one," Michael said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and awe. "Look up Alina Vance and cardiothoracic surgery. Look up Great Ormond Street Hospital." To placate him, and perhaps out of her own dawning curiosity, Dr. Jenkins did a cursory internet search. The first page of results was a revelation: academic papers, news articles about a surgical prodigy, a profile in the Lancet asterisk, a photograph of a younger, confident Dr. Alina Vance in surgical scrubs, standing before a conference podium. The woman in the photo was unmistakably the woman who mopped their halls. Dr. Jenkins leaned back in her chair, her face pale. "Oh my God." The administration's reaction was not gratitude, it was panic. A hidden surgeon posed a liability nightmare. Did she have a current license? Was she practicing medicine covertly? Could the school be sued? A secret emergency meeting was called with the district superintendent and the school board attorney. The tone was defensive and fearful. Alina, summoned to the principal's office after her shift, found herself facing not just Dr. Jenkins, but a wall of concerned, suspicious faces. They didn't ask her story. They presented an ultimatum: provide proof of her current medical licensing status by the end of the week, or be placed on immediate administrative leave pending a fitness for duty review. The humanity of her situation was buried beneath policy manuals and risk assessment forms. Alina left the office, the walls of her life collapsing inwards. The news, however, could not be contained. A school secretary had overheard fragments. By the next day, a hushed, wild rumor was snaking through the parent WhatsApp groups. The janitor is a secret brain surgeon. The story reached a local reporter, a young woman named Anya Desai from the Boston Metro asterisk, who smelled something more profound than a quirky human interest piece. She dug deeper than the school had, accessing international medical databases and court records. She uncovered the outline of the tragedy: the dead sister and brother-in-law, the guardianship of triplets, the immigration, the husband's cancer, the bankruptcy. She also found the professional void: no current Massachusetts medical license, no record of disciplinary action, just a glaring 5-year gap in practice. Her article, published online the following Tuesday, was not titled "Secret Surgeon." It was titled "The Broken System: How Massachusetts Lost a World-Class Surgeon to a Mop and Bucket." It laid bare the brutal math of relicensing, the debt, the brain waste. It named Alina. It named Michael Thorne as the saved patient. It quoted the staggering Migration Policy Institute statistic: 270,000. Overnight, the story exploded from local curiosity to national outrage. For Alina, the exposure was a fresh hell. News vans camped outside her rented duplex. Her daughters were bewildered, asked intrusive questions on the playground. The school, now under a media microscope, officially placed her on paid leave, citing the disruption. But the real storm was just beginning. The community reaction split violently. Many parents, moved by her sacrifice, organized a meal train, a fund to help with her debt. They saw a hero brought low by a broken system. But a vocal, fearful minority led by a parent named Karen Grierson saw a threat. She lied on her employment application. Karen argued at a hastily called PTA meeting. "She's emotionally unstable, who goes from surgery to cleaning. What if she has a breakdown around our kids? She's a stranger with a mysterious past." This argument, fueled by prejudice and fear, gained traction. A petition circulated demanding her termination, citing deception and potential psychological risk. The school, paralyzed, did nothing. Michael Thorne watched this division with growing horror. He had wanted answers, not a witch hunt. He found Alina one evening sitting alone on a bench in the deserted school playground, still in her uniform, staring at her hands. He sat beside her, the silence heavy between them. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I didn't mean for this." "You asked a question," Alina replied, her voice hollow. "The system gave you the answer. It's not your fault the answer is ugly." "Tell me," he said. "Tell me the truth, all of it." And so, under the dim playground lights, she did. She told him about the accident, the impossible choice, the licensing maze designed like a trap, the slow-motion financial drowning, the love for her husband, and the agony of his loss. She spoke not as a victim, but as a chronicler of her own defeat. Michael listened, and as he did, his initial confusion solidified into a cold, clear rage, not at her, but at the invisible machinery that had chewed her up. "They can't just throw you away," he said, standing up. "You saved me. That's not nothing, that's a fact." He became an unlikely ally. He gave interviews stating plainly, "This woman gave me a second life, and now our system is treating her like garbage. What does that say about us?" He used his story as a lever. Meanwhile, the national spotlight had consequences. Emails began flooding the inbox of the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine. News segments asked pointed questions. And then a letter arrived at Aliner's home, not from the school board but from the chief of surgery at Boston General Hospital. It expressed profound respect for her work and invited her publicly to discuss potential pathways to reintegration. It was a lifeline, but a dangerous one. Accepting it meant walking back into the very system that had exiled her, under the glare of a public expecting a fairy tale ending. It meant potentially facing the relicensing gauntlet again, with the whole world watching her fail. And it meant that the quiet burial of Dr. Aliner Vance was over. The ghost was now expected to perform a resurrection. But as she read the letter, a different, more immediate threat arrived. A formal notice from the school district's legal counsel. A hearing was scheduled in 72 hours to determine her employment status, based on allegations of fraudulent omission. The battle was no longer in the court of public opinion. It was in a small conference room, where they would decide if she was even fit to clean their floors. The school district hearing was not a trial, but it felt like one. Held in the same boardroom where they approved budget allocations for textbooks, the atmosphere was frigid with legal caution. Aliner sat on one side of a long table, accompanied only by a union representative who kept sighing at the complexity of it all. Across from her sat the district's human resources director, the school board attorney, and Principal Jenkins, who refused to meet her eyes. Karen Grierson, the petition leader, was allowed to attend as a community stakeholder. She took meticulous notes, her pen tapping like a metronome of disapproval. The argument was ruthlessly procedural. The district's case hinged on a single line in the employment application. Have you ever held a professional license, medical, legal, engineering, that has been revoked, suspended, or lapsed? Aliner had checked no. The attorney, a man named Robert Finch, presented this as deliberate fraud. You were a licensed physician in the United Kingdom. That license lapsed when you did not renew it upon moving. You withheld material information about your professional history, which could have impacted our risk assessment. Aliner's union rep argued that the question was ambiguous. It asked about licenses held, not previously held, and that a lapsed foreign medical license had no bearing on her ability to push a floor buffer. The debate descended into semantic hell, but the real damage was done when Karen Grierson was allowed to speak. "It's not about the box she checked," Karen said, voice trembling with performative concern. "It's about trust. We trust the people in our schools with our children's safety. This is a person who lived a double life. She watched our children while hiding a massive, traumatic past. That shows a capacity for deception that makes me, as a parent, deeply uncomfortable." The word uncomfortable landed like a verdict. Aliner was given a final chance to speak. She looked at her hands folded on the table. She thought of the hundreds of hours she had spent in rooms like this, fighting for surgical protocols, for better equipment. Now she was fighting for the right to clean their floors. She didn't plead. She stated facts. "I came to this country in crisis to care for 3 Bobbies who had lost everything. Every decision I made was to keep a roof over their heads and food in their mouths. I took this job because it offered health insurance and a schedule that allowed me to be a mother. My past as a surgeon was not hidden as a deception. It was buried as a grief. I did not think it was relevant. I was wrong. But I have never for 1 second been a danger to any child in this school. My actions during the playground incident prove that." The room was silent. Robert Finch adjusted his tie. "Your dedication is noted, Ms. Vance. The board will deliberate." They deliberated for 24 hours. The result was a Solomonic split that satisfied no one. Alina was not fired, but she was permanently reassigned. Effective immediately, she was transferred to the district's central maintenance depot, a warehouse on the industrial edge of town where she would service and clean school buses, away from any direct contact with students. It was an exile disguised as a compromise. She could keep her benefits, her salary, but she was removed from the ecosystem of the school, from the familiar halls, from the chance encounters with her own daughters during the day. The message was clear: you are a liability to be contained. Michael Thorne was furious when he heard. "They're treating you like a contagion," he told her over the phone. "You need to fight this." "I'm tired, Michael," Alina replied, the defeat in her voice absolute. "I just need the insurance." But the world had other plans. The Boston Metro article had sparked a wildfire far beyond local outrage. It landed on the desk of a producer for Newsline *, a national investigative television program. They saw a story that epitomized a dozen systemic failures: healthcare, immigration, occupational licensing, gender bias, and the crushing weight of medical debt. They dispatched a team, led by a veteran journalist named Marcus Thorne, no relation, who approached Alina not for a soundbite, but for a documentary segment. They also began digging where the local paper had not, and what they found changed everything. Marcus and his team filed public records requests with the Massachusetts Medical Board. They tracked down Alina's initial application for licensure from over a decade prior. And there, buried in the correspondence, was a bombshell. The board had not simply lost her application or given a generic denial. 3 years after she applied, while she was deep in caring for her dying husband, the board had sent a final determination letter. It stated that her training, while exceptional, did not meet the specific state-mandated requirements for current, hands-on procedural proficiency. To qualify, she would need to complete not 1, but 2 years of supervised practice in an approved U.S. surgical residency, a physical and financial impossibility for a single mother of 3. But the letter also contained a crucial, overlooked sentence. Alternatively, the board may consider an extraordinary contribution to the field of medicine or demonstration of unique expertise as mitigating factors for a modified, accelerated pathway. This clause was a ghost. No one had ever mentioned it to her. No advisor, no lawyer. It was a theoretical escape hatch that required an advocate within the medical establishment powerful enough to pull the lever. Armed with this, the Newsline team confronted the current head of the medical board in an on-camera interview. The chairman, an older physician, squirmed. He admitted the extraordinary contribution clause existed, but called it archaic and rarely invoked for reasons of maintaining standards. When pressed on whether saving a man with a revolutionary technique, as documented in international journals, constituted an extraordinary contribution, he stammered about process and peer review. The segment was devastating. It portrayed the board not as guardians of safety, but as gatekeepers of a closed shop. It reframed Alina's story from one of personal tragedy to one of systemic sabotage. The broadcast was a sensation. It reached Dr. Aris Thacker, the chief of surgery at Boston General, who had sent the initial letter. He hadn't known about the clause either, but now, with public pressure at a peak and a clear documented pathway, he saw a chance to be on the right side of history. He called Alina personally. "Dr. Vance," he said, the title deliberate, "Boston General is prepared to sponsor you. We will submit a formal petition to the medical board, citing your published work and the Thorne case as that extraordinary contribution. We will oversee a 6-month tailored preceptorship, not a 2-year residency. But you have to be willing to come back into the OR. As an observer first, then as a surgeon. It's the only way." It was the lifeline, now with a specific, terrifying shape. Return to the operating room, the place of her greatest triumphs and the source of her deepest loss. Her hands, now calloused from industrial cleaner, would have to hold a scalpel again. The psychological wall she had built was taller than any licensing barrier. She told Dr. Thacker she needed to think. While she wrestled with this private terror, a second, more immediate crisis erupted. One of Michael Thorne's daughters, Ava, the one who had found the textbook, began experiencing severe chest pains and shortness of breath at school. The school nurse, overwhelmed, called an ambulance. Michael, frantic, met them at the local community hospital. The initial diagnosis was anxiety, a reaction to the stress of the media circus. But Michael didn't believe it. He had a terrifying thought. What if it was cardiac? What if it was something inherited, something related to his own repaired heart? The community hospital pediatrician ordered an echocardiogram. The images were concerning but unclear. They recommended transfer to Boston General for a specialist. In the chaos of the emergency department, Michael made a decision. He didn't call the specialist on duty. He called a leaner. "Something's wrong with Ava," he said, his voice cracking. "They're talking about a possible valve issue. I don't trust them. I need you to look." Alina was at the bus depot degreasing an engine part. Her world narrowed to his voice. The doctor in her snapped to attention, overriding the janitor, the widow, the debtor. What are her vitals? What did the echo show? Describe the pain. She fired off questions, her mind assembling a differential diagnosis. She told him to get the raw echo images on a disc. "Bring her to Boston General. I'll meet you there. Call Dr. Thacker's office. Tell them Alina Vance is requesting an urgent consult for a potential pediatric valve pathology. Use my name." She didn't ask for permission. She gave orders. Hanging up, she looked at her supervisor. "I have a family emergency." She didn't wait for a reply. She drove to the city, still in her grease-stained depot uniform. At Boston General, a surreal scene unfolded. Alina Vance, in janitor's clothes, stood in the prestigious cardiology department, holding a digital tablet with Ava's echo images. Dr. Thacker, true to his word, had assembled his top pediatric cardiologist. They were discussing the case when Alina pointed to a subtle, fluttering motion on the screen. "There," she said. "It's not the valve itself. It's a subaortic membrane. It's thin, it's dynamic, it explains the intermittent symptoms. A standard echo might miss it at rest. She needs a transesophageal echo under sedation to confirm." The staff cardiologist, a man named Dr. Evans, was skeptical. "That's an extremely rare presentation. It's not rare in patients with a history of a repaired bicuspid aortic valve in a parent," Alina countered calmly, citing a niche study from her own research. "Which Mr. Thorne has. It's a possible associated anomaly." A silence fell. She was not just a former doctor. She was a subspecialist arguing at the top of her field. Dr. Thacker watched, fascinated. He ordered the test Alina suggested. She was right. The membrane was there, a tiny, dangerous web that could cause sudden cardiac failure. The required surgery was delicate but straightforward for a skilled pediatric cardiac surgeon. As they scheduled the procedure, Dr. Evans turned to Alina. "Who will you refer to for the surgery?" "We have two excellent surgeons here." Alina didn't hesitate. She looked at Michael, who was holding a sleeping Ava. Then she looked at Dr. Thacker. "I will do it," she said, "under your supervision as the first step of my preceptorship. I pioneered a less invasive approach for this exact condition. It's in my paper from 2011. The audacity of the statement sucked the air from the room. A janitor without a license was proposing to perform heart surgery on a child. On television, it would be madness. In medicine, it was a challenge to their entire system. Dr. Thacker had a choice: hide behind protocol or bet on genius. He looked at the certainty in Alina's eyes, the fear in Michael's, and the data on the screen. "Draw up the plans," he said to her. "Present them to the surgical board tomorrow. We'll have to get an emergency provisional waiver from the medical board, and you'll need to pass a procedural skills assessment in our simulation lab tonight." So that is where Act 2 ends. Not with a hearing about floors, but in a high-tech simulation lab at midnight. Alina Vance, dressed in borrowed scrubs, stands over a robotic pediatric mannequin that bleeds, breathes, and fails in real time. Her evaluators are three senior surgeons, their arms crossed. The test is a simulated repair of the exact subaortic membrane she diagnosed. The tools are in her hands, the real tools, not a mop or a wrench. The ghost of the operating room is no longer a memory. It is a wall of expectant, skeptical faces, a ticking clock, and a little girl's heartbeat on a monitor across town. She has one chance to prove that what was buried was not dead but dormant, that a decade of silence was not an ending but an intermission. The scalpel feels foreign. Her heart is a drum in her chest. She takes a breath and looks down. The future of two families and the fate of a forgotten clause now rests on the steadiness of a janitor's hands. The simulation lab was silent except for the mechanical whir of the robotic heart and the soft beep of the monitors. Alina's world shrank to the glow of the surgical lights and the feel of the instruments in her hands. The first minute was agony. Her fingers felt thick, clumsy. The scalpel trembled. She was aware of the three evaluating surgeons watching her every move, their eyes on the screen that mirrored her precise hand motions. She made an initial incision, and it was good, but not perfect. Her mind screamed with a decade of rust. Then something shifted. Muscle memory, deeper than conscious thought, began to wake up. The tremor steadied. Her hands remembered the weight, the balance. She entered the simulated chest cavity. The pathology was exactly as she had diagnosed. The subaortic membrane was a gossamer thread, perilously close to the valve leaflets. The procedure required removing it without leaving a single cell behind, lest it regrow, and without touching the delicate valve structures. She had written the paper on this. She had invented a technique using micro-scissors and a unique angled approach. As she began, she explained each step in a calm, low voice, not for the evaluators, but to anchor herself. Retracting the aortic wall, visualizing the membrane now, the dissection must be in the plane between the membrane and the endocardium. The robotic arms became an extension of her will. The procedure took 27 minutes. When she finished, the simulated heartbeat stabilized into a perfect, strong rhythm. The lead evaluator, Dr. Evans, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for half an hour. He looked at the data, then at Alina. "Where did you learn that lateral approach?" "I didn't learn it," Alina said, finally looking up, her brow damp with sweat. "I designed it." He nodded slowly, a gesture of pure professional respect. "The board will have our recommendation in the morning." At dawn, an emergency meeting of the hospital's surgical credentialing committee and a representative from the state medical board convened via video conference. The simulation data was presented. Dr. Thacker argued passionately for the extraordinary contribution clause, citing her diagnostic acumen with AVA and her proven, published expertise. The medical board representative, under the glaring spotlight of pending media coverage, agreed to issue a 60-day provisional license, restricting her practice to pediatric cardiac surgery under Dr. Thacker's direct supervision. It was unprecedented. It was a band-aid on a gaping wound in the system, but it was a chance. Ava's surgery was scheduled for that afternoon. The operating room at Boston General was a cathedral of sterile light. Alina scrubbed in, methodically, each brush stroke a ritual she thought she'd forgotten. She donned the gown and gloves, the fabric feeling both alien and like a second skin. Dr. Thacker stood across from her as her supervising surgeon. Michael Thorne waited in the family lounge, holding the hands of his other two daughters. Alina's own triplets were at school, unaware their mother was in an OR for the first time in over a decade. The moment the anesthesia team gave the go-ahead, Alina's entire being focused. This was no simulation. This was a child. Ava's small chest was prepped. Alina picked up the scalpel. The first cut was perfect. The surgery was a high-wire act without a net. Every second was a potential disaster. But as she worked, a profound calm settled over her. The years of grief, debt, and bleach fell away. Here she was not a janitor, a widow, or a debtor. She was a surgeon. She was an artist. She performed the exact procedure she had simulated, but with a living, fragile heart under her hands. Her movements were economical, graceful, definitive. Dr. Thacker watched, intervening only to hand her instruments. He later said it was like watching a masterclass. The membrane was excised completely. The valve was untouched and pristine. The repair was flawless. As she closed, the anesthesiologist announced strong vital signs. The operation was a success. In the scrub room afterward, Alina leaned against the sink, her body trembling with spent adrenaline. Dr. Thacker put a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome back, Dr. Vance." The news of the successful surgery broke like a wave. The narrative shifted from fallen surgeon to medical phoenix. The school district, facing a public relations nightmare, quietly offered Alina her old job back at Lincoln Elementary. She declined. She resigned. Her final paycheck from the depot included a modest, anonymous bonus, likely from a collection taken by sympathetic district staff. The media storm reached its peak and began to subside, replaced by substantive discussions about licensing reform. A state senator, inspired by her case, drafted a bill nicknamed the Vance Act, creating a clear, accelerated pathway to licensure for internationally trained physicians with proven expertise and for domestic doctors re-entering after a caregiving hiatus. But the real resolution was quieter and human. Michael Thorne, overwhelmed with gratitude, struggled to find the words. One evening, he brought his daughters to Alina's duplex. The 6 girls, the six-pack, played in the backyard, their laughter weaving together the 2 fractured families. Michael and Alina sat on the porch steps. "You gave me my life back twice," he said quietly. "I don't know how to repay that." "You already did," Alina replied. "You saw me when I was invisible." A friendship forged in trauma and discovery took root. He began helping with school runs, giving her the time to attend the mandatory lectures and tutorials for her reinstatement. Her own daughters, once confused, now looked at her with a new, bewildered pride. "My mum fixes hearts," Sophie told her teacher. The provisional license led to a full, unrestricted license after 6 months of supervised practice. Boston General offered her a permanent position as an attending pediatric cardiac surgeon. The salary was more than enough to erase her debts within a year, but the most surprising detail emerged from the hospital's legal department. During the credentialing process, they discovered a clause in the hospital's own malpractice insurance policy that covered eminent scholars joining the staff. It paid out a one-time, substantial recruitment incentive. The sum was enough to buy a small house. Alina purchased a home 3 blocks from Lincoln Elementary, with a yard for 6 little girls to play in. The night she moved in, she opened the jewelry box and put her wedding ring and her intern's band back on. They were no longer symbols of loss, but of continuity. The final scene of Act 3 is not in an operating room, but in a school hallway. It is the following year's career day at Lincoln Elementary. Alina Vance stands at the front of a first-grade classroom, not in gray, but in a simple blazer. On the wall behind her is an image of a human heart. In her hand, she holds a scalpel. She is demonstrating on a large model how to repair a valve. The children, including her own triplets and the Thorne girls, watch with rapt attention. In the back of the room, Michael Thorne watches, a small smile on his face. The teacher thanks Dr. Vance for coming. As Alina packs her model, a little boy tugs on her sleeve. "My grandpa says you used to clean our school." Alina kneels down to his level. "That's right, I did." "Why?" he asks, genuinely puzzled. She thinks for a moment. "Because sometimes," she says, "you have to do what it takes to take care of your family. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to come back and do what you love too." The answer satisfies him. He runs off to recess. Alina walks out into the warm, sun-drenched hallway. She passes a janitor buffing the floor. They exchange a nod of mutual respect. She pushes the heavy door open and steps outside into a future she had buried but which was waiting for her all along. The fall from grace was not a descent into obscurity. It was a detour. The sacrifice was not the end of her story, but the foundation of its second chapter. The hands that held the mop never forgot the scalpel. They were just waiting for the right heart to beat, to remind them. Alina Vance's story has a happy ending, but it is not a fairy tale. It is a testament to brutal resilience and a glaring indictment of a system that almost let a world-class skill set rot in a bucket of disinfectant. She is back in the operating room now, her hands having traded the mop for the scalpel once more. But she is not the same surgeon she was. She carries with her the memory of fluorescent lights at 5 a.m., the weight of silence in empty hallways, the profound understanding of what it means to be invisible. That perspective, forged in humility, now informs every incision, every conversation with a terrified parent. She has seen medicine from the floor looking up, and it has made her, arguably, a better doctor. Yet the central, haunting question remains. How many Alina Vances are still out there unseen? Remember the number, 270,000. That's the estimated number of immigrant health professionals in the United States working in jobs far beneath their training and their potential. They are driving taxis, cleaning offices, working in kitchens, not by choice, but because of a labyrinth of licensing, credentialing, and financial barriers that treats their hard-won expertise as irrelevant. This is what economists call brain waste, but that sterile term hides a human tragedy of wasted purpose, crushing debt, and quiet despair. Alina's visibility was a freak accident, a perfect storm of a curious child, a recognizable patient and media attention. For every one of her, there are hundreds whose genius remains buried, whose sacrifices go unnoticed, whose hands are never rediscovered. So this brings us to a question, not about systems, but about us. How do we measure a person's worth? Is it by the title on their door or the content of their character? Is it by the uniform they wear or the battles they've fought in silence? Alina Vance was a janitor. She was also a savior. Both were true at the same time. We walk past people every day whose resumes are written in scars and sacrifices we cannot see, whose current job is a monument to a love or a loss that demanded everything. The most profound expertise can sometimes be hidden under the most ordinary surface. Her journey from the pinnacle of medicine to the bottom of the service economy and back again forces us to look at our own assumptions. It challenges the very architecture of how we gatekeep professions, how we support caregivers, and how we value human capital over paperwork. It's a story about the cost of sacrifice, the price of starting over, and the enduring, unbreakable nature of true vocation. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the hidden battles people face, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever encountered someone whose true story shocked you? Or have you been the one hiding in plain sight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you want to support more documentaries that uncover the human truth behind the headlines, please give this video a like. It helps more people find these important stories. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder that everyone has a story worth hearing. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon. You'll never miss a deep dive into the lives that remind us of our shared humanity. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones you stop seeing every day. See you in the next story.